Kalimarasas, good morning. Well, we haven't done this in a little while. It's called Stump the Priest. Questions that you might have, a question or questions that you might have. Periodically during the year, instead of giving a formal sermon, I'll do what I'm doing now. Open up for conversation, open up for questions for a few minutes, and see if you have something in mind, something you have seen, something you have heard, hopefully of some religious nature. It doesn't have to be strictly religious, but something that would be of moral teaching for us to be able to share. So any ideas, any thoughts? But before we start that, or as we're offering that and giving you a chance, for those of you who want to offer any questions, I want to start out by saying something. Don't want to scandalize anybody, please. That's not my purpose. From the time I was a very, very small child, I grew up in a family where there were guns available. My father was an avid hunter, and as I was growing up, in fact, I remember the first time I went hunting with him, I was 5 years old, and I, from then, was taught very carefully and very completely to treat guns with absolute respect. A gun is a tool. It's something that can be used for good, beneficial, and of course it can be used for something not good and beneficial. But it's a tool. How we use it determines its worth. Just as I'm sure none of you who might have guns in your environment, in your home, for whatever purpose, you would not give your gun to your child to take a loaded gun, to take and to do with it whatever he or she wishes. In fact, the opposite. You would go to great length to be sure that later, when the child is old enough to be able to handle the responsibility of being able to take a gun after much teaching, after much effort on your part to guide your child in how to respect this tool, it is only then, and again with great care, that you would continue to teach and guide your child in the proper, respectful use of that firearm. I did the same for my boys. And to this day, they have access, obviously, on their own. And now the irony is, now they're showing me how to be able to use that tool even more respectfully and more carefully. Where did we come up with this? Very recently, again, I was exposed to a circumstance where a very accessible tool has been taken and is being used in a very careless, very dangerous, very frightening way. And this tool, this item, highly accessible, is something that every single house I'm sure, I'm not overstating that, every single house has access to and uses. And every single one of us were probably giving this very accessible, very dangerous tool to our children. But how many of us are giving our children this tool without first making sure that this child knows how to use it properly and how not to abuse it? You see this? This is not the first time you've heard my concern about this. But again, very, very recently, another circumstance has come up where there was, only through the grace of God, there was not a very, very terrible, tragic result. My beloved, our children are the most precious things that we have. So I know we want them to have something good. We want them to be safe, and we should. And they provides a lot of safety, a lot of assurance, protection, so that they can know how, if in an emergency, call 911 and or whatever. And it gives us an opportunity to be in touch with my child, my grandchild, whatever, in a somewhat easier way than when we were growing up. We didn't have this. I think we're better off. But the problem is, this gives access for other sources in this world to come into your home, and you don't even know it. You don't even realize it. What I'm getting at is, how many of us have heard of TikTok? Among other things, be careful. Make sure you know what your kid is doing. Among the things that has recently happened, I know it's been out there for a while, but this happened close by. There is a game on TikTok whereby one person goes to another person and chokes him out to the point of that person being unconscious. I don't know. What's the kick there? But that's what it is. Well, a couple of young people decided that it was a lark. I'm sure it wasn't something wanted to show off to maybe a couple of other buddies that were there. So one choked out the other one, brought him to the point of being unconscious, and to the point then of that particular young person being out and unfortunately starting to hemorrhage. I'm sorry, I'm getting graphic here, but we need to be aware of this. We need to be awake of this. Started hemorrhaging, and they ended up having to the hospital. The good news is it worked out okay. My concern, and the concern of people around, is when you give your child this, just like you would not give your child a loaded gun, don't give this child, your child, our children, this without some safeguards, without some boundaries, without some opportunity for them to know what is right and what's not right. And this stuff that they have access that you don't even know, we don't know, and I'm not pointing to you. I'm now with grandchildren, okay? So for those of you that have younger ones of you here that have the younger children with this, please be sure you keep tabs on your kids' activities and her contacts. You don't know who is on the other side of this telephone at times, having access to your child and talking to your child and telling your child what? I don't know. You don't know. I'm not saying take this away from your child. I'm saying be careful. Please, please, dear God, be careful. I'm not overstating this. If you think I'm overstating it, your choice. I. God gave me, you, us, a free will, a mialo, a brain to use. That doesn't mean giving a loaded gun to my young child. Please, please, please keep up with what your child is doing with this. I didn't mean that to bring us a downer. I brought this again because God forbid, anything else can take place. And anyway, I'll let that go for now. The floor is open for questions for the next 5-10 minutes. Any questions? Yes, sir. Josh, you're going to have to speak up. I'm an old man and I can barely hear. Oh, boy. Oh, you had to learn. Where did you pick that one up? You really are stumping. Okay. Thank you. What is the thing with, and great question. What is the thing with the Orthodox, the Eastern Orthodox, and the Roman Catholic difference? We both, again, for 1,000 years, we were one church. For 1,000 years. There was a split in the 11th century, 1054, between East and West. Eastern Orthodox Church. West is modern Roman Catholic Church. And from the Roman Catholics came later, about 5 centuries later, came the so-called Protestant Reformation. Anyway, but communion, well placed, communion for both of us is the body and blood of Christ. It's not a representation, it's not a symbol, it's not in memory or memorial or any of those. It's the actual body and blood of Christ. And from that, we share that common, strong belief, the Romans and the Greeks or the Eastern Orthodox. But we give the bread, you need to go? Piganete. The communion, the host, in the Eastern Orthodox Church is bread, leavened bread. That means that we prepare it with yeast, flour, and yeast. It's a very simple recipe, the prosphoro, the bread that you make. And by the way, I hope, maybe sometime very soon, if we can get 1 or 2 of our ladies that know how to make prosphoro to open it up again so that others can make the prosphoro. Right now thankfully, we have 3 ladies, sometimes a 4th lady, that makes the bread for the communion. But it's a sacrament too. And the prayers involved, but it's simple ingredients. I'm not going to get off on that part of it today. But we'll try to set up a class. Παρακαλούμε τις γυναίκες που ξέρουν πώς να φτιάσουν πρόσφορο, θα παρακαλέσω 1-2 κυρίες για να έχουμε μάθημα ξανά, όπως είχαμε πριν από κάμποσο καιρό, για να μάθουμε και άλλοι και περισσότεροι πώς και τι να κάνουμε για πρόσφορο. The bread that we use is leavened bread, and the bread that is used by the Western or the Roman Church is unleavened. It's a flat wafer. What's the difference? I've looked up this, Josh. I've looked this up and tried to find some kind of absolute difference and clearly depicted and explained difference. I haven't heard the big difference other than this is what we're doing. At what point did one depart from the other? Why is it one using it and the other not using it? Leavened bread and unleavened bread. This goes back actually to the time of the Egyptian, mass migration from Egypt for the Hebrews, going to the Holy Land, to their promised land by Moses, and then they were told, among other things, to prepare very quickly. They were instructed by God the Jewish people were told, hurry up, prepare because you're going to be leaving. You're leaving Egypt and you're going to the promised land. And there the bread was not allowed to rise. They didn't have enough time for it to rise. And this is where that idea came in. And then at some particular point later, this is one of the explanations is that this is the completion, that we're now at the time of Christ, and subsequent to Christ's arrival on earth, that this is the bread to show that we're in its completion, that the bread is now fully, totally able to be completed and become the body and blood of Christ. I wish I could give you a more succinct answer, but I'll give you that one today. One for Josh. But I will remember. Question. Wow. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. If God is perfect, when we go to heaven, hoping we go to heaven. Great. Another great question. When we perish, when we leave this earth, and we enter what is called, for us, it's called the church triumphant. The church is divided into two parts. Church militant, that's the church in which we live now. And church militant because there is a battle going on all the time. There is spiritual warfare going on all around us all the time. We can't see it with these physical eyes, can't hear it with our physical ears because it's in the spiritual realm. It's still there. It's a war between God and the forces of the devil, and constantly striving to gain our attention. The devil is good at what he does, and he's trying very much to distract us. Church militant. The other half of the church is called the church triumphant. That's in the spiritual realm, and it's still a part of the whole church. The entire church is the church of God. The church militant and the church triumphant. It's one is this dimension, church triumphant is the next dimension. Question well placed. What happens actually to the soul after the body and the soul separate? Where does the soul go? That's another big, open-ended question. No actual dogma, meaning an unerring truth, has been offered in that. There have been speculations that the soul, when it separates from the body, some have it that it hovers around loved ones. And this is why, like we had today, we had a 40-day memorial for a loved one, for Aristea. And a tradition, a little belief is that the soul is hovering around the loved ones for the 40 days. Why 40 days? Say? Christ was, remember, after he was resurrected, 40 days on earth before he ascended to be with heaven. That's where the 40 comes from. So is that the case? Is the soul still here? I don't know. I can't give you a yes/no answer. That's beyond my pay grade for sure. That part, though, is where does it go if it's not here? And then after it leaves here, where does it go? We do not have a purgatory like our Roman Catholic friends have. Purgatory is a place where, as one of my Roman Catholic priest friends, we talk among ourselves periodically, the priests, whether you're Lutheran, Presbyterian, Baptist, Orthodox, whatever. we talk, and we sometimes, dig at each other a little bit. You mean, you believe what? The idea, that was a joke, okay? We joke among ourselves. We have sense of humor too, I promise. We like to laugh too. But purgatory was begun at some point in the Western Church to show where the soul goes to be purified so that it can be ready for the second coming. Remember, we have not yet had a second coming. We all have to remember that. So when we say that this person is going to be with God, yes, God, he will be, she will be. But don't forget, that second coming has not yet occurred. That's why the soul is somewhere there. Where is the soul? Purgatory, it's being purified. What does that mean? Have you ever heard, those of you that are into metallurgy, into how metal is created? Remember, one of the things that occurs to metal, as it's being formed, as it's being strengthened, it's being placed in what? Fire. Fire. So that as the metal, which is made up of different items, as it's placed in the fire and it becomes hotter, and the technician or the blacksmith or the whatever is hitting it, knocking out the impurities. The more impurities that are knocked out of the metal, the stronger the metal is. That's fact. So the idea is, for my Western Christian friends, our Roman Catholic friends, the soul is placed in a hot purgatory, in a fire, to be purified so that when the second coming of Christ occurs, the soul will be allowed to come closer to God. That's where that came from. The Eastern Church has never had that. And where does the soul go? Somewhere close to God. It's in a state of anticipation. A state of anticipation where it is waiting for the second coming, just like we're waiting in the church militant. The soul of our loved ones are waiting in the church triumphant for the second coming of Christ. One of the things we do believe that Jesus told us when we were on earth, that we have a responsibility to pray for each other. This is what we're doing. We're praying for each other here. And he didn't ask us to pray for each other. He told us to pray for each other. It wasn't a request. It was a demand. It was a very strong expectation. My question then is, in trying to sort of answer your question, well-placed question, where does the soul go? We don't know, but I still have a responsibility to pray for that person. This is what we're doing. We're continuing to pray for that person. Did you hear the words that were offered? We're praying that he or she is going to be in a place where there is no sorrow, no suffering, no sighing, but ultimately it's God's answer and God's decision to make. At the second coming is when you and I will receive our final reward. Until then, we're in this anticipatory state. This is why we ask each other to pray for us here, and when we leave this earth, please continue to pray for me. Don't forget me. Eonia inimi. May the memory be eternal. That's a prayer that you hear very often in Orthodox circles. And it's a prayer, an awesome, outstanding, significant prayer. May her memory be eternal. As long as we remember her memory, she's still actually existing here with us. We still pray for her. We still ask her to pray for us. I ask loved ones to pray for me all the time. I do, because I need their prayers. And I do not forget my loved ones. We should not forget our loved ones. It's that important, but we're still part of the same church. The umbrella is still there. Church militant, church triumphant. It's still the church, and we still have the responsibility to pray for each other. The soul continues to exist, bottom line. That I can give you an answer to. And thank you for that well-placed question. One more? Yes, sir. Thank you. Is there any sin that cannot be forgiven? The absolute answer is no sin cannot be forgiven. Wait. There's always a wait, except, okay? Except the sin that I do not ask forgiveness for. If I do not ask forgiveness for something, then how is God going to forgive me? We do have, you notice the prayers, those of you that are here, during the liturgy, we have a very generous lady donated those liturgy books that you have in your pews in front of you. Donated in memory of a loved one, by the way. And those books are there to help those of you who want to read along with the prayers that are in the liturgy so that you can see everything that's going on. One thing, this, everything is beautifully connected. But we're going to have to make a little bit of an effort also to learn the liturgy a little better maybe, or at least read the liturgy books put right in front of us, Greek, English, so that can help us see where we are. The idea is the prayers in there talk about sins that we know and sins we do not know. If I know that I've committed a sin and do not ask God forgiveness for that sin, God's not going to forgive it. But if I ask Him for forgiveness, whatever sin it may be, He will forgive me. The only sin that I cannot be forgiven for is the one that I have consciously not asked forgiveness from God for that sin. Is this making sense? So all I have to ask from my heart, forgiveness, and it is offered. Let me add one more little caveat. I guess one of the most difficult situations is even after confession, and confession is one of the most powerful and one of the oldest of all of our sacraments. Again, offered by Christ Himself. It's an awesome, unbelievably powerful sacrament. It is making us as pure as we were on the day we were baptized. After confession and the prayer of absolution is read over you, you are as sinless as you were the day that you were baptized. Oh, geez, went way over. I'm sorry. Anyway, but we have a problem there sometimes when the person has had the prayer read over him or her by the priest, and that person leaves, and that person still is not feeling forgiven. Why is that person not being forgiven? You know that one too. Because that person has not forgiven himself. And that is a big sin. Because that means if I do not forgive myself, if I do not forgive myself, after I have come before the icon of Christ, gone through the sacrament of confession with my priest, and then had the prayer, place this over his head, have the prayer read over him, absolving him from the sins, and then he kisses the Pistolis, thereby acknowledging that this was given by Christ Himself. Read the Holy Scriptures, by the way, for our Protestant friends. It's in Holy Scripture that this sacrament comes, not from some made-up something. All right? So, kisses this to graphically, positively say, I recognize and realize that God, through this priest, through the laying on of hands, I have a direct line to the disciples themselves. I'm not perfect? No. I said I have a direct line through the bishop that ordained me, to the bishop that ordained him, that ordained him, to one of the disciples himself, to one of the original disciples. This is how all of this is tied in. This is why we say we're one of the same churches founded by Christ and His disciples 2,000 years ago. It's not a statement we want to brag about. It's a statement of responsibility that I have to live up to. You have to live up to. So, if I do not forgive myself, it's telling God, you can forgive me, but I am even more holy than you are. I'm even higher than you are. My standards are even better, higher than yours are. That's a pretty big step to take, and dangerous step. We need, talk with your spiritual mentor. Talk with your priest, an Orthodox priest, to be able to help you with these particular things, because these are vital, vitally important for our salvation. Let me stop here. I apologize for, again, going over, but you had some very good questions, again, and we appreciate very much your participation and your patience.